India Confederation of the Blind. Training workshop on the rights of persons with disabilities with particular emphasis on the visually impaired for AICB affiliates in South India. Sponsored by Danish Association of the Blind. Now we'll move on to the first business session, that is on importance of advocacy in the context of self-help movement of the blind, perspectives and prospects. So, which will be dealt by our President and Advocacy Chair, Dr. Anil K. Aneja sir, because he has got a vast experience and he has been with AICB for a long time, and he has been working with Delhi University, and he has, as I said, for all the cases, he drafts the petitions, and also whenever there is a CCPD case, he himself argues, and he brought victory. He has been bringing victory to the organization. So it will be a very pleasure to hear from you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muthu, and good morning once again to everyone. After that very enlightening talk from Mr. Prabhakaran, I find somebody wants to say something? Somebody raised hand?
It's from iPhone, so it must be from Sri Hari sir, I think. Sri Hari sir.
Yes, Sri Hari, first, before we start.
DWAB.
So, tell us, what is the issue?
Yeah. Aishwarya, can you unmute him?
Yeah, I've already asked him.
iPhone, who's from iPhone? Raise the hand. Just talk, sir. Sri Hari sir. Or,
anyway, I request the participants not to raise hand during the talk. You will have an opportunity to ask questions, and when we open it for interactions, which we will do. Muthu, keep the time. Let's say this talk ends at 11:30. So you want me around 11:17, 11:18.
Sure.
I will keep my talk brief so that we have some time for questions and answers. So as I said, it's very difficult to find strategies to engage the audience after the enlightening talk that we've had from Mr. Prabhakaran, our keynoter. And the topic is very vast. Topic is very vast for various reasons. Advocacy itself is a very big topic. We have a 2-day workshop, and even then we are not able to do justice to all the areas of advocacy which we want to cover. The whole domain of self-help organization, the history runs nearly 90 or 100 years. In some way or other, self-help organizations have been around 100 years ago, which something people may not know. I'm talking globally, but not just for the context of India. And also, when we try to combine and say what is the role of advocacy, I think we need to go to the roots and the core of any self-help organization. Even before that, for a brief point, I want to draw your attention to the formation of the society itself. Because self-help organization is an expression of a social system. And if it's an arm and expression of a social system, it is a social system that we should understand first before we understand how the domain of self-help organization fits into that social system. Many of you must be students of political science here, or sociology, or law, and won't understand perhaps what I'm trying to say. And even others, I'm sure, would try to relate to it. So the question that I ask first is, why was society in general formed? There are 3 important theories on why was society in general formed: Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. These names must be well familiar to all of you. While these philosophers may differ in their interpretation of the causes of formation of society, one thing is common. That all the 3 philosophers agree the society was formed so the lives of the individuals could be better. There should be a principle of harmony. equity and equality, there should be a sense of togetherness and unity in the world. Because it's the jungle Raj, without society, there's only anarchy. So the movement towards the formation of society was a movement from anarchy to order. Naturally, then, in the formation of the philosophy of formation of society, it was then assumed that everybody's life would become hunky-dory. Everybody would be happy. Everybody would get their rights, space, and well-being. Due to various factors, which I do not want to go into because of constraints of time, that did not happen. So then political instruments came into being, right from Magna Carta to the Constitution of India to even after that. Many documents were signed. The social contract was not the only first agreement. That was the first. But then if it did not yield what was expected to be yielded from it, there were other documents over a period of time, treaties, political documents, understandings, international agreements, as starting from Magna Carta to anything, which was signed in order to ensure that there is harmony, equality, and everybody's development and well-being is assured. Even that did not work. If you look at our Indian Constitution, for instance, there are 7 fundamental rights, and it was assumed that of those 7 fundamental rights are granted, life would be fine. The right to equality is there, the right to equity is there, the right to freedom is there, the right to education is there, the right to life is there, the right to property. So many rights are there. What is the problem then? Despite these rights being there, again, various interest groups were left behind because of the hegemony or because of the biopower or because of hierarchy that naturally prevails in the society. We know about Darwin, and Darwin talks about the selection of natural selection of species. The argument there is the higher species always tries to crush the lower species. That is, I don't know whether biologically that works. I don't want to get into the theory. But surely in social power equations, that works. And in social power equations, the larger interest group or the more powerful, the more wealthy, the more politically informed, more enlightened power group always, or time and again, should I say, not always, time and again have tried to suppress the others. So despite all these efforts, when nothing worked, people belonging to particular interest groups started getting together and voicing for their rights. And this was the origin of self-help organization in the world. When social contract theory did not work, when political treaties and agreements did not work, when constitution provisions did not work, and society continued to marginalize certain people. I'm not even talking of visually impaired persons right now, persons with disabilities. That's a part of it. And if we really want to develop, we need to look at persons with disabilities as a part of a larger discourse on marginality. Only then we can achieve inclusion, first in the context of marginality, and then in the context of society. If we start looking at ourselves as totally isolated and living in our own island, then inclusion can never be achieved. That has been one of the problems, perhaps, that we are not willing to, one, integrate ourselves with other marginality groups, and two, with the civil society. We all look at ourselves totally isolated. We think we create our own system, our own world. We do not exist in the world. If that is the thought, perhaps then we're going to be difficult. So we need to go beyond now and see how we can link our larger concerns, our concern with larger discourses. I was reading somewhere that a fly has very limited power, but if it sits on the back of an elephant, it can travel thousands of miles. So we need to find now those elements on whose back we can sit so we can travel thousands of miles. that later. Coming back to this whole issue of self-help organization. So the self-help organizations performed when, despite everything, it was felt that their concerns concerning particular interest groups were not being addressed. In the context of the visually impaired, this movement, before I come to visually impaired, in the context of disability, I would say that this movement started sometime after the First World War. War is very dangerous, but it does some good things also. So one of the good things that the First World War, I mean, unfortunate, but good, I'm saying only because there's some positivity to it. I'm not saying war is to be endorsed for this purpose, never. Don't mistake me on that. But one of the things that happened after the First World War, that the whole body of soldiers, war veterans, war disabled, who returned home, huge number in Europe. And they were the first one. We talk about the self-help organization, the visually impaired person. In fact, the first self-help organization that we know of advocating for their rights were the organizations of the war veteran, which were formed after the First World War. And that's why I said in the beginning that the self-help movement is nearly 100 years old, though we may not recognize it. Not just these organizations, people who got together started pressing for more rights, more facilities for themselves, advocating for their rights. Many of them were marginalized from their families. Many of them were poor. Most of them lost their jobs. They were economically marginalized. Families were destroyed. Medical facilities were not there. And therefore, these organizations were formed to advocate for their rights. That was the root of this organization, advocacy. And advocacy, in my argument, has been, ought to be, should I say, must be, at the root of any self-help organization, in fact, if that self-help organization is to survive. It's in this context that this today's workshop becomes important. It's not the first time that we are having workshops on advocacy, not at all. I've been associated with AICB for nearly 27 years now, in some way or other. And I would say that a number of workshops have been held in the area of advocacy or issues related to advocacy. Because advocacy is not something isolated again. Technology is some area, is a part of advocacy. Women empowerment is a part of advocacy. CBR is a part of advocacy. Advocacy runs across. It's not that advocacy is something, research is something else. These are tools. Advocacy is the fundamental principle, the soul of any organization, and strategies such like providing services through CBR, strategies such as empowerment of women, strategies such as technology are various ways of doing advocacy. It is not that technology has to be done through advocacy. Advocacy is the source of technological accessibility. That's why technology and accessibility are very important, because these are also these are come about through advocacy. So we often have this tendency to look at the word the reverse way. We think that research is different, advocacy is different. No, research is one of the strategies of advocacy. Even services, I argue, are one of the strategies of advocacy. So advocacy is at the soul of any self-help organization, and no self-help organization can survive without, and if it doesn't do advocacy. If we are only in service deliveries, in conducting events, functions, giving charitable donors to people, scholarships are very important. Scholarships are also a form of advocacy, because through that we empower people. Services, any service is also part of advocacy. But if we do not have advocacy as a philosophy in service delivery, then our service become mere charity. And there is a difference between charity and empowerment, charity and rights. Charity is only service, something which was there in 1950s in India, just soon after independence, 1950s, 60s, okay, and in Europe much earlier than that. Even when the war veterans, and later on the visually organizations of the visually impaired. I want to talk about two very important organizations in Europe, which were self-help organizations, which continue to be very important self-help organizations even today. The ONCE in Spain and the National Federation of the Blind USA. Both organizations took shape sometime in early 1940s. Of course, before that, we had a very important development in early 1920s, the white cane, and how the history of the white cane over the last 10 years between 1920s and 1930s, many of us are familiar with that. And the white cane, I hold, was a very important advocacy tool, because that was a statement to the world that the visually impaired persons can walk, can have independent mobility, can perform independent functioning. It was just not a white cane. If you say one of the fundamental advocacy symbols, I would say it's white cane, because it's that that made a statement first time to the world that visually impaired persons are not dependent on anyone. They can be independent. And this also happened after the First World War. And I may mention, but when we come to organizations specifically, and the white cane also was promoted at that time by certain individuals and organizations in France and other countries, in US, about that. There was a whole history to it. Actually, time doesn't permit me to go back because I would like to leave some time for questions. We are already in 11:16. So another 5 to 7 minutes I take on this topic, and I'll open that for questions. We need to stick to time because every speaker is from outside, many speakers from outside, so they need to be attended in time. And of course, I have one more session with you in the afternoon, so I cover some of the points there. So in 1940s, we had the origin of National Federation of the Blind USA. Of course, it gained prominence in 1960s, that's true. But the organization such was first originally formed in 1940s, and also the ONCE in Spain. What was the spirit of this organization? So ONCE was originally an employment-based organization. Employment still continues to be a very important area of empowerment advocacy. Today also, most of the AICB's cases are on employment. And ONCE was able to convince Spanish government that all the lottery contracts, lottery members, the lottery vendors should be visually impaired. Now, whether investing in lottery is a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. And I'm not getting into that. But what I wish to say is that it was a very important activity in Spain that time. And ONCE saw that as very important income generating activity. And then somehow the government was convinced that at least lottery certificate, which every visually impaired persons can give to others. So only visually impaired persons were authorized to send lotteries from the IT. And the system continues to be valid even to today in Spain to a large extent. Of course, in the recent years, I understand that various other disabilities are also voiced for these rights. Some of them perhaps have been granted or something of that kind. But still, it's a very important source of income for the visually impaired in Spain. And also, because of this, now this was, what could you say? This was advocacy. Advocacy which affected at the individual micro level, because every individual got money in his or her own hand. And even today, this continues to be a very important source of income for the organization. The organization has huge amount of buildings and properties and resources, real self-help organization. Because if it is an organization which is able to give money to people in Latin America and other countries for development purposes, it's an important organization in World Blind Union only because it could generate resources. And therefore, resource generation is very important for advocacy. Without resources, that's why I was so happy when Mr. Prabhakaran offered to help us with that. Because without resource generation, there cannot be much advocacy. You can try some. We also had nothing. When AICB started advocacy, we were doing right from the beginning in some way or other. As our services were also a part of advocacy, we used to, our conference is part of advocacy. But advocacy as a project, when we started sometime in 1999, and the first case we took up, before that we had filed one case in the Supreme Court, but the systematic way, when we took up advocacy in 1999, I remember the very first case I argued in Punjab National Bank. I'll talk more about this in the afternoon. There's no time. We had nothing, no resource base, no money even for conveyance. I remember for first 4 years at advocacy, I used to spend my own money on vehicles and go to courts and all that, lawyers, and everything was, we had no support from anywhere. But we did advocacy. But then real strides could be made only when we got some resource support, from wherever. Then we went to High Court, we find some impact cases. There is a book, as you know, till 2012, and we need to update that book. I think we'll take up as a project sometime to update our cases in the last 10 years. That book talks about the AICB achievements in advocacy in 2012, 15 important PILs called Combating Discrimination of Path-Making Advocacy Initiative for Visually Impaired. So this was ONSE. National Federation of the Blind also started not just employment, but rights-based movement in 1940, which got up in 1960s and later. And these two organizations, as I said, continue to be important organizations even today globally. When we talk about India, we had first some charity-based organization, National Association of Blind, which started in 1950s. And then National Federation of the Blind Graduate, which Mr. Kaur and Mr. Mittal started, along with some others, which was later named as National Federation of the Blind in 1972, and AICB, which started in 1980 with 10 founders. Again, what was the principle of AICB? The fundamental principle of philosophy of AICB is to empower our affiliates. Nothing else. And what does empowerment of affiliates means? That affiliates should be able to make a difference in the lives of the visually impaired at the grassroots level. That's the only vision we have. The rest is all action. The vision is that the last individual at the grassroots should be touched, not by us sitting at the center in Delhi, we know a bit of course, but by people who are in various states, small organizations with their membership, how to support and empower them. So again, advocacy was at the roots of AICB, and much has been done by AICB in the advocacy, very important impact cases. And therefore, this workshop today, as I said, is one such attempt to see how far we have gone with our affiliates, how far more we can go, what are the issues in various states, how we can take up those issues, how we can further ensure the realization of rights which have been granted, not just in our constitution, but also in various acts and policies. There is a very important lecture by the former Deputy Chief Commissioner and the Commissioner Delhi Government, Mr. Dharian, just soon after this in 11:45 on the rights of the visual in the various legislations and policies. But policies alone are not enough. You can make n number of policies. But the point is, unless these are put into action, and who's going to put them into action? The self-help organizations. And who is self-help organizations? Are these buildings? Are these bank accounts? Are these memorandums of associate constitutions? No. The self-help organizations, in the true sense of the word, are individuals, you and me, all of us, members. So we, the members, have to put the philosophy of advocacy and empowerment into action. Organization, office bearers, and CEC members, or whatever they are nothing. Unless the membership takes a lead, not much can be done. These are only engines. If there are no bogies, the train would not exist. The train is not the engine. Office bearers may be the engines, but unless the bogies are there, the train would not run. So an engine also needs sustenance, and the sustenance comes from our membership. So strengthen your membership, strengthen your knowledge, strengthen your commitment. It was very sad. I'm sure even today, if I ask, I've done this many times when the PWD Act was in place, the earlier one, and every workshop I used to ask how many people have read PWD Act, and the answer used to be a distant, not even 10%. And this is among the visually impaired organization leaders. I don't know what the answer today would be. The RPD Act has got slightly more popularity, but I'm not sure how many of us have really read that Act thoroughly, page to page, and understood that. It's not just important to be aware of RPD Act. It's important to read the Act. It's important to understand the various nuances of the Act. It's important to understand how that Act is relevant to us, because If that act is not relevant to us, we should just discard it and then try to take action to ensure that our lives, as well as the lives of our thousands and lakhs of brothers and sisters, our members who may be hundreds in our organization or thousands perhaps, are made better. We have a huge country and there's a lot of work to be done. While the AICB is doing good work at the center in some states, we still look to leadership of the states affiliates to tell us what more can be done. We time and again come forward with resources and support, but further initiative you have to take, because ultimately it's your lives which will be touched if empowerment, advocacy, and rights are, if rights are denied, empowerment takes place through this strategy of advocacy. It is with this hope that today we have this workshop, that whatever we talk here should not remain with just 5-6 people who are coming from each organization. Whatever we talk here, you must go back, conduct similar workshop discussions, if not 2 days, 1 day, half day, whatever. Talk to your membership, tell them what it is. Unless the knowledge percolates to the last person in the organization, the grassroots, we are not successful in our AICB philosophy. And it's to that they will look to your support, because without advocacy, as I said, no organization can sustain. And if you want organization, and soon, in fact, the state government will take over, may take over a number of services or others. But if advocacy is not there, soon we may find ourselves becoming irrelevant, because members may then have other organizations which are stronger in advocacy and listen to their voice to go to. So stay relevant, to fulfill our purposes, to empower ourselves, not just other membership. When we empower others, in a way we empower ourselves. It's important that we realize that advocacy is a soul and substance, or in the context of self-organizations, and take action to make that a reality. Thank you very much. Now I'm open to questions.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Because this session is very important, because many of us are hearing about advocacy, but for this younger generation, it's very difficult to find an authentic information on advocacy, and self-help organization of the blind. So it's going to be very useful, not only to this gathering, when we upload it in a social media channel also. So everybody will make use of this lecture. So really, thank you, sir. And I'm sure your hope will be put it as an action. So thank you very much, sir. Now we'll move on to the questions.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Hello, am I audible to you?
Yeah,
Yes.
very much.
Sir, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Sir, actually, yesterday also we put a memorandum in our press note also in front of MuthuSelvi Madam regarding our independent commissioner for disabled in our state. As per RPWD Act 2016, we should have independent commissioner for every state. But in our Telangana state, those who are appointing as a director of disabled welfare department, they are only appointed as a commissioner of our department. So several times we requested and we gave representations to the government also. They are not at all responding at all, sir. What should we do?
Mr. Swaminathan, the problem is, even in the office of the chief commissioner, we don't have independent chief commissioner for many, many years. And we don't have independent commissioner also. We don't have independent deputy chief commissioner also, perhaps. I don't know. The deputy chief ones they have appointed. For commissioner and chief commissioner, we don't have independent. So that is the problem. That's a drawback act, but we should surely agitate for it. We should write to the government, and then we should file a case. Because the point is, additional charge can be given in government, and but that's a problem. Important thing is, it doesn't matter who the officer is, whether the officer is discharging his or duties is something we should look at. If that's not happening, then definitely we should agitate, go to the High Court for a more, but with proper evidence and proof. Because Act just says there will be a chief commissioner. It doesn't say he will have no other duties. So as far even the central government, we don't have a chief commissioner who is independent.
And we don't
Can we
have,
take any help from your side in this regarding advocacy help, sir?
yeah. So we don't have in the center also a commissioner or a chief commissioner. But important thing to see a functioning rather than whether the person is independent or not. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir, Aneja sir, with your permission, if anybody would like to ask questions in, if at all they want to ask questions in
No, I think
regional
we'll break
language,
now.
leaders will translate.
Is in 11:30?
Yeah.
Somebody's there? Is somebody there to ask questions?
No.
Yeah, so we have afternoon session also with me, so there'll be opportunity to
No,
come.
I said that if at all anybody has wants to ask question in regional languages, their leaders will translate.
Yeah, we can do that.
People may be able to understand very well. Sometimes, if they have difficulty in asking in English, we can translate.
So it's 11:30 now. We break for 15 minutes. Please join exactly at 11:45 or 2 minutes before that, because we have very important speaker coming, Mr. Tharian, at 11:45. So please join in time. Thank you very much for this morning session.